You will need some scissors and tape so that you can cut out the graphs on the last 2 pages of your notes and tape them to the matching functions. In this section of the lesson, we are only going to look at the different types of parent functions, what their equation looks like, what their table values will be, what their graphs will look like, and then their domain and range. Here's our first parent function. Something you've all should be very familiar with, our linear function. You'll see it in y equals mx plus b, your slope-intercept form. With your parent function, you can have y equals x or f of x equals x. A couple things you should know. Most of the time in pre-cal, we're going to use f of x and not y equals. Please, please, please do not think that it's f times x. It's actually f of x and just means it's a function. Okay, so let's fill out the table. Most of you should be very adept at filling out your linear tables. I've given you all the values here. If x is -5, your y is going to be -5. And if x is -3, y is -3 as well. Notice with our parent functions, we're not transforming our equations at all. This is just what the basic function looks like. Okay. Now let's look at our domain and range. If you look at your graph in your table, you have little arrow points showing that the graph is going to continue on indefinitely. Now on our calculators, you're not going to see those arrow points. I'm just drawing them in the graphs so that you will know that we're not just going to stop at -5 or +5. It will keep on going. So when we do our domain and range, it's going to be from -infinity to +infinity. And remember, we're using parentheses. So what I want you to do now, go ahead and match up your graph for your linear equation and write what you think the domain and range is. Once you get that done, go ahead and keep playing the video and see if you get it right. All right, so how did you do with your domain and range? It should be pretty easy. If you have any questions, we will keep on working through this video and write your questions down, and you can ask me in class tomorrow. All right, our next parent function is our quadratic equation. You should be very familiar with it as well. Notice this time, for the formula, I just have the f of x equals x squared, not y equals x squared. Like I said, most of the time in pre-cal you will be using f of x instead of y. Just make sure you recall that it's the same thing. All right, now on this table I'm only going to give you a couple of the values. You should be able to fill out the rest of the values. And remember with the quadratic formula, if your x is -3, please make sure the negative is in parentheses. So if you include the negative, it should be open parentheses, -3, close parentheses, squared. If you leave it out, your answer will be -9 instead of +9. Okay. I want you to finish filling out your table. You should be able to do this without a calculator, I hope. And then once you get your table filled out and your graph taped on, go ahead and see if you can figure out what the domain and range will be for this one. All right, how did you do? Did you use the bracket on the range? Okay. Notice that because our table has the value that when x is 0, y is also 0, that means that we do land on 0, 0. So that point will be included in our range. If I haven't said it already before, I hope you know that the domain stands for all possible x values and the range stands for all possible y values. Most of you probably already know that, but those of you that have forgotten, there's your review. And again, if you have any questions, write them down, bring them to class tomorrow. Our cubic function, f of x equals x cubed. Okay, again, I'm going to give you some of the values on the table. I want you to fill out the rest of the values. Now, with x cubed, you have, if your x is negative, your y is going to be negative. If your if your x is positive, your y will be positive, okay? Don't just drop the negative sign. And I would like you to try to do this without your calculator. Just remember, when you're multiplying negative numbers, if you have 3 of them, your answer will be negative. Okay. Once you fill out your table and match up the correct graph, I want you to figure out the domain and range. I'm not going to show you the domain and range in this video. You will need to write down what you think it will be, and you can check your answers in class tomorrow. Exponential functions. All right, so this is the first parent function that I do include a numeric value, and my base number for exponential function is a 2. I could have used any number there, and it would have looked very similar as long as the number was greater than 1. Okay, I'm going to show you another example where my base number is a fraction, and it will look similar. It'll just look like I flipped the graph around. Okay, so hopefully most of you remember seeing exponential functions in Algebra 2. It shouldn't be totally brand new to you. If it is, you might want to look at some other videos on YouTube that cover exponential functions. We will get into it. We will look at exponential functions further probably in October, but I just want you to be aware of what the parent function looks like. All right, let's look at the table. I'm giving you these values, so if you don't have a calculator handy, just copy down what's up here. And one thing I want you to notice is that my y value, or my f of x value, is getting really, really small, but it never becomes a negative. If I had a negative 1 million as my x, it would still be a positive y value. The reason why is because my x-axis, or when y equals 0, I have an asymptote there. Okay, so I don't think I've talked about, or I don't think I've explained what asymptotes are yet. We will get into it more in the next lesson, but just real quick, asymptotes are anytime you have a line that your graph will not cross. And on your calculator, you're not going to see your asymptote there. It'll just be a gap. All right, so we'll cover asymptotes more in the next lesson. Let's go ahead and move on with this. What do you think the domain and range is? See if you can, I want you to write down what you think it is before you move on this video. All right, how did you do? Did you write the range correctly? Did you use a bracket or parentheses next to the 0? You should have used parentheses because you've got an asymptote there. You can't actually land, you cannot land on y equals 0. All right, here's another example of the exponential parent function. This time my base number, instead of having a base number of 2, I have a base number of 1/2. I'm going to give you some of the table values. I want you to go back and look at the table values you have for the exponential function f of x equals 2 raised to the x power, and see how the table values might compare to each other. What do you think the missing values are? See if you can figure that out without a calculator. Okay, and then once you get that done, go ahead and figure out the domain and range. Again, I'm not going to show you the answers now. You will guess, take an educated guess, and then you can compare your answers in class tomorrow. Absolute values. Here's another parent function you should be very familiar with. If you had too much fun this summer and forgot everything, just remember with absolute value symbol, you just ignore any negative signs. So if x is -5 or +5, you're going to have the same y value of 5. I've shown you these examples in the table. I want you to go ahead and finish the table, then write down what you think the domain and range is for this parent function, and then we will again compare our answers tomorrow in class. All right, here's our rational functions. I'm going to show you two different rational parent functions. This is the first one where you have f of x equals 1 divided by x, and then we will look at a different one in just a little bit. On this one, I'm going to give you a lot of the values in your table. I want you to see if you can figure out what the f of x values or the y values are when x is 2 and 8. Look at your table, compare the different answers in the table and see if you can figure out the other answer. See if you can do it without a calculator. I would really like you to try to do it without the calculator. One thing I want to point out to you is that when x equals 0, y is undefined. This UND, that means undefined. Okay? That means that you've got an asymptote there. Okay? Anytime you have a break, you're going to have an asymptote. And again, we'll look at asymptotes more later on in the next lesson. All right, so now I want you to go ahead and look back at your set and interval notation notes and see if you can figure out how to do the domain and range with this example. You've got to show that there's an asymptote there. Okay? Go ahead and pause this, see if you can figure out the domain and range, and then move on. Once you get it down, push play again and we'll see if you are correct. All right, how did you do? Did you remember to use your little U conjunction? Are you getting better at notating domain and range? Here's our second rational function. We have f of x equals 1 divided by x squared. This is the other one. And again, I'm only going to give you a few of the table values. See if you can answer the rest without a calculator. If it helps, look at your graph. Okay? Your graph will help you with your other values. And then once you get the table values filled out, guess what the domain and range is, and you can check your answers in class tomorrow. Logarithms. I know a lot of people hate logarithms. I used to too until I started teaching it. We're going to have a lot of fun with logarithms. For now, let's look at some of the table values. Okay, go ahead and copy those down, and then I want you to see if you can figure out what your y value will be when x is -2 and -1. All right, I'm not going to give you the answers on your table value, but just write down what you think it is, and then we'll look at it in class tomorrow. And let's see if you can guess what the domain and range are. Go ahead and pause this and write down your domain and range, and then we'll move on. All right, I'm giving you the domain. Did you do it right? You can check to see if your range value is correct tomorrow in class. We are almost done. Now, our square root parent function, I'm giving you the domain and range for this, and I'm going to give you two of your values on your table. I want you to fill out the rest, and we'll check your answers in class tomorrow. So with this one, you really just need to fill out the rest of the table values. It might help if you remember when you're square rooting. Go go back and see, okay, when what is 1 times 1? Or, what times what will give you 4? All right, our last parent function is our cube root function. Hopefully you have not fallen asleep yet. I think I've included enough information on the table that you can answer the rest of the questions on your own. Please, please, please go ahead and fill this stuff out and bring it into class with you tomorrow. Have it out as you walk in the door. I will check and see if you have it done. If you got it done, then you get to participate in our class activities.